Welcome, everybody. I think we're waiting for a few people to come in, but we might kick off. Thank you so much for making the effort to come and join us, particularly when I know it's a not particularly pleasant day outside, so we really appreciate you being here with us. I would like to start this morning by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Turrbal, Jagera, and the Yagara peoples. In the context of this conference, and particularly the context of this session on localization, I want to recognize traditional custodians' connection to land, sea, and community, and the traditional knowledge and thousands of years of experience and wisdom. We pay our respects and gratitude to their elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm really excited to be hosting this particular session here on elevating local leadership. My name is Kate Sutton. I'm a co-director at Humanitarian Advisory Group. And I've had the enormous pleasure of working with all these wonderful panelists over the last couple of years. And what I can promise you is that you will get honesty today in this session. You will hear real stories from real civil society actors who can really give us insights into what we need to learn. Civil society is so critical to effective disaster risk reduction. NGOs, women's groups, organizations for people with disability, and community forums, they know their communities. They understand the risks, and they are the ones who are in the position to be able to help families and communities prepare. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be telling stories. We're going to be telling stories from these wonderful panelists who've been interacting with their communities over many, many years, and drawing learning from those stories about how we can promote the role of civil society. We're also going to be running a poll. So please make sure you're on the app. I'll let you know when it comes up, but you can go into your conference program, find Spotlight 7, and when the poll comes up, we'd love to get some of your perspectives on that question. So before we get going, I'd like to introduce all our panel members. I think it's important to put out there, I know that I am the least best dressed on this panel. It's absolutely beautiful to see some of the traditional costumes from the countries you're coming from. So a warm welcome to all of you. I'd like to start by introducing Kiasi Pongi, who's the Executive Director of the Civil Society of Forum of Tonga. Kiasi is an advocate and leader on issues related to gender, youth, disability, climate change, and the environment, and obviously has been a fierce leader in Tonga over the last couple of years with all the challenges that they've had in that country context. So it's such a pleasure to have you, Kiasi. Siale Ilalahia is the Executive Director of Piango, which is the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs. And Siale's built an inspirational career bringing together civil society partnerships and was recognized for her enormous contribution with a Collaborative Leadership Award in 2016. It's lovely to have you with us, Siale. Naomi Tai. Naomi is a DRR officer for the Peoples with Disabilities in the Solomon Islands. Naomi supports agencies to implement disaster-inclusive programming. She's a strong advocate and youth leader in the Pacific. And importantly, and not included in her formal profile for the conference, I found out yesterday, she's a Paralympic medalist winner. You're welcome to put questions about that, and she can talk to it. And last but not least, Dr. Puji Pujiono. Puji is a senior advisor at the Pujiono Center in Indonesia. He's a thought leader in the civil society movement in disaster management and humanitarian response, not only in Indonesia, but also regionally and globally. Puji is one of the founders of the Indonesia Development and Humanitarian Alliance that includes more than 800 national and local organizations in Indonesia. So please welcome our panelists. So I'd like to start with you, Kiasi, if I may. I know we've talked a lot about the role of women in civil society and the important role they play. And you spend a lot of time in communities talking with women. So what are you hearing?
Thank you, Kate. Firstly, it's truly an honor to be invited to participate in this platform on behalf of Civil Society Forum of Tonga and our members. The contribution of community women towards disaster risk reduction is enormous. Unfortunately, most of the time, their work is not recognized, and most importantly, unsupported. They are the unsung heroes who work hard with big hearts to overcome and rebuild in the face of disaster. All of our community-based groups are led by women, and it is their voices in which I am here today to represent. And I will do that by sharing stories, but I think, Kate, before that, please let me give you all a bit of context on the kind of natural disasters that frequently occur and has recently occurred in my country. Tonga has been classified as the second most at-risk country in the world in terms of exposure to natural hazards and the unfolding effects of climate change. In 2018, we were visited by a severe tropical cyclone named Jida, which did a lot of damage to our country. And again this year, on the 15th of February, we experienced the extremely powerful eruption of the Hungahapai Hungatonga submarine volcanoes that triggered tsunamis destroying homes, resorts on the west coast of Tongatapu, including some of the outer islands, causing displacements, total shutdown of all forms of communication, ash rain, covering the entire islands, and contaminated our drinking water. The World Bank estimated it to be around US 43.7 million worth of damage to residential buildings. Sharing on their experiences from the volcanic eruptions and tsunamis, the stories that I wish to share with you today are stories of faith, preparedness, resilience, and adaptation on the road to recovery.
You're doing brilliantly. We have brought tissues. I'm just warning you. We have tissues on the panel.
Shared by the women, in which we have had the pleasure to help and work with during the response and recovery phase, which is still ongoing. So to begin with, I would like to share a story of faith that was shared by one mother. And this is how she told her story. It was just an ordinary Saturday late afternoon. The sun was shining bright outside. All of a sudden, there was an extremely loud boom that came from the skies. The children in the neighborhood were yelling out the name of the volcano and pointing to the sky. Then came a second boom. The louvers in my house sounded like they'd been smashed. My daughter yelled to me, "Mommy, look, live stream on Facebook. There's a tsunami coming." Then came another terrifying boom. I called my daughter and niece into the house. I was absolutely terrified, knowing something terrible was going to happen. I felt it was like going to be the end of the world. My only hope and faith was to pray for protection. We got down on our knees to speak and pray and cry out to the Lord, "Please protect my country." Suddenly, everything went dark outside, and rain ash started to fall. I believe we were shielded by an unseen force. From a story of faith to a story of preparedness in the context of DRR was shared to us by a woman community leader, and this is her story. Our group has always been preparing for disasters. Normally, we prepare for cyclones, and then with the lockdown due to COVID-19, we realized the importance to always be even more prepared. So we stock up our cans of food, water bottles, and so forth that should last us a month or two. We also put money into our group's bank account so we can easily access funds, especially during post-disaster time. We didn't really prepare nor expect a volcanic eruption, but when it did happen, we felt very happy because, well, we didn't have to worry about getting supplies as we had already stocked up and prepared well ahead. From preparedness to resilience and adaptation on the road to recovery, another woman leader, community leader, shared her story. And here it is. We have lost everything to the tsunami, even though some houses are still standing, but everything inside is destroyed. However, we will continue to repair what we can use or what we can do for now while waiting for further assistance. I felt very sad because my children, after realizing we have lost everything, asked me, "Mommy, where are we going to live?" Excuse me. I told them with a brave face, trying not to shed any tears, that they should not worry. We will soon have a brand new house. I try to remain positive and strong for my family, especially my children. This was another story. And this is the last story. I can go on, but I know I will take up all the time. So another woman leader also shared her story. And she says, "The women in our village become concerned about food shortage. Since the tsunami has destroyed our plantations, so we sought assistance from NGOs who were able to provide us with top-up soil and vegetable seedlings and other short-term crops that can be harvested in less than a year. Now we are enjoying the fruits of our harvest, and we are going into replanting of weaving materials like pandanus." In conclusion to my speech, I would like to highlight the following points. The role of community-based women groups in preparedness and response need to be well recognized and supported on a national, regional, and international level. And this can be made possible by embracing localization, where international donors and government agencies can agree, and all key stakeholders can agree to stand together to support the work of community groups, community women in their preparedness, response, and recovery. Thank you very much for your attention.
Kiasi, thank you so much. I promised you that you would get real stories. We so appreciate you sharing. And you know, when you talked about the unsung heroes, that's really the women in the community so often are the unsung heroes. So you've given them a voice. Thank you for doing that today. I was also really struck when you talked about the fact that they'd spent so much time preparing and actually putting money in the bank accounts, and they didn't know what the disaster was, but they really were very proactive. So wonderful stories. Thank you. And Siali, maybe to you, I mean, you have a really unique role in playing a regional role and how to connect civil society in a regional way. So I'd love to hear some of your stories.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll just build on from Kiasi's sharing. I'm not supposed to cry because I was not in Tonga. I was in Fiji working there as the executive director of Piango. But it just shows how one stories can be understood and embraced by most of us, because our struggle is no different to any of our other countries. Yeah? But I also want to recognize that in our region, Piango is a platform of regional platform of umbrella NGOs. So CAS is our member in Tonga. So is our other umbrella NGOs across the region in 24 countries and territories. Yeah? It's beyond the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat setup, because we recognize that our connections in our region is not defined by, political sovereignty structure. We still have some of our countries that are under the authority of the states and France. Yeah? So our setup is based on people. Doesn't matter whether you are in a structure, a political structure that should not define who we are as Pacific people and our connections. So because of that, we have a very wide knowledge and understanding of the different culture of our country. And that's what has been tested in the Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai crisis. The significance of the Tonga Hunga Hapai Hunga Tonga crisis, because it was multiple layers. First, it was a many boom, bang, whatever the eruptions was that has brought ashes. That was just like drown the whole water system that the government has to declare that it's not safe for drinking. So it's become a water crisis. And then the tsunami, which affected about 3 main of our small island community, was totally wiped out. So people has to be moved inland. And then, you know, in the whole lot of response, COVID decided to come along too. But the most significant one was the cut in the fiber optic connections, which was the communication blacked out. I think it has gone for about almost 2 weeks. And then we started connecting, but then very limited. Yeah? So the response that Tonga usually have through our INGOs and, you know, the UN and whoever that you can name, who often fly in, fly out in the times of humanitarian response, was limited. And so who ended up responding? People, the very people that Cass is talking about. But the interesting thing is, how is it connected at the regional level? So when we had the crisis, my family, I'm only on my own in Fiji. My family were in Tonga. So the emotional is real, even if you are not there. So I can really connect to the diaspora community of the Tongans who are here in Australia, New Zealand, the States, wherever they are, that their sense of what's happening is real, as I had. But because I know Tonga enough, that I started to mobilize response from Fiji. This is during the time when the government of Fiji and everybody else was trying to connect to Tonga. They couldn't. But because I'm Tongan myself, I know exactly what they need and what is required. And then so we had the Fiji Council of Social Services is our member in Fiji. And Wani is the executive director of FCOS. Unfortunately, she's speaking in the other session. She said, NDMO in Fiji is sending a boat to the Lau group to do like a scoping of the impact of the wave. You know, the wave went as far as Mexico. Yeah, that's how big it was. And when you're talking about Sikas talking about faith, that's the only thing that they could resort to. Yeah, because it was huge. And so Vani said to me, government of Fiji is sending one boat to do scoping. Lau group is just like supposed to belong to Tonga, but I don't know why Fiji keep them. So they are sending one boat. So we got in touch with our friend, the director of NDMO in Fiji. And we said, there's one boat going to do scoping in Lau. Can you just ask the boat to, you know, a little bit further and send some support to Tonga? And they said, no, this is a scoping. So the conversation, and these are among women. Women DRR leaders within Pacific that sit in Fiji has this kind of conversation. Then she said, there's one boat going. Then I went to Vani's office and I said, there is, we may be able to fill 4 drums, you know, those big drums that goes to the boat. Okay, we already organized ourselves to fill the 4 drums. And then the call from the NDMO, they said, there's one boat going, there's a big, huge container, 40 foot. It's available for civil society to send their stuff to Tonga. We were prepared for 4 drums. Yeah? Fiji at the time has like 3 waves of COVID, I think 3 cyclones, many plenty flights. So the whole response to the, how do you withdraw from an empty pocket of existing people? Yeah? But they managed to fill the container and send it to Cassie and her team to distribute. Yeah? So really the story is just traditional knowledge and understanding and wisdom sits with the local people. Even if they're displaced different countries, yeah. They're there. Anticipatory resources to help these people connect is just as important. Yeah? Thank you. I think I have some other points, but I'll leave it for later.
Thank you, Siali. Yeah, we'll hopefully have lots of time for questions. But I mean, the thing that strikes me about that, Siali, is the existence of relationships prior to being so important in that context. So thank you so much. Naomi, I'd love to come to you. So you've been a really strong advocate for people with disabilities being engaged in DRR. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what you've learned from that experience.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you that I'll have this opportunity to be in this level, especially in this spotlight event, to deliberate the voices of persons with disabilities. I will share my experience and the disasters that I face in my country. I have come across some of the disasters that happened in my country. I experienced the 2014 flash flood personally in Solomon Island in Honiara. For all humans, your safety is an important thing. And during disasters, we want to reach our loved ones and ensure that they are also safe. From my experience, I was in the office at the time of the 2014 flash flood. I am scared, and I have to think of what action I needed to take. I remember thinking of, do I go to the safe place? How do I reach home or get home? How can I find my parents or families? My experience of disaster as a person with disability influenced my decision to become a DRR officer at PWDSI. I want to make sure local people, including people with disabilities, are DRR-led efforts. People with disabilities are 4 times more likely to die or be impacted during disasters, which means we must involve in disaster preparedness activities. I have met many Solomon Island persons with disabilities in the country, especially right down to our communities where we work, we engage with our partners. They have shared that they are likely to be left behind evacuation in disasters due to lack of preparedness and planning, as well as inaccessible facilities, services, and transportation. There is a misconception that persons with disabilities are included in community DRR activities because, in my experience, people think we can contribute and that we are not educated or that our voices are unheard or important, but our voices are matter. People with disabilities have important lived experience of adapting to or overcoming barriers and have diverse perspectives and capacity to bring to community DRR activities and systems. It is important to understand that the risk of disaster can be reduced. Everyone has capacity, strength, and that they can draw on and apply. This understanding is central to an inclusive approach of DRR. Removing barriers and improving access reduce risks. This is not only for people with disabilities. Improve access benefits for all and reduce risk for all. And removing barriers is an essential DRR part of the good DRR activities. When people with disabilities are included in DRR activities, their heightened risk is reduced, and the whole community benefits from being more informed and prepared in a disaster. I've been excited to be part of this research, which have been take place in our country between Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. So it is part of the advocacy level of the OBDs in the country. So the findings that we find in this research, OBDs are making a difference in ensuring that persons with disability are included in DRR. However, we are always not involved in that space. When DRR processes fail to collect disability data, we cannot be included most at risk of disasters. OBDs don't have enough funding capacity to meet their own needs, as well as the needs of NGOs and government partners. This constrains ability to drive change at multi-levels, such as changing communities' attitude towards disabilities. Partners' approach are critical for OBD's success, perhaps more so than for other local partners. Equal participation practice lower attitudinal barriers in our communities and support the capacity of OBDs to participate in decision making as strong enablers of maximum contribution to the DRR sector. As an OBD member myself, we need to be included in disaster planning, decision-making processes. We are capable and knowledgeable of barriers affecting those most at risk of a disaster and ready to help. We just need to be invited to have a seat at the table.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Naomi, thank you so much. And I think the really big takeaway for me when you're talking about OPDs is that there is evidence they make such an enormous difference, but they need to be resourced and provided and supported with capacity to be able to do that. So hopefully we can unpick a little bit as we discuss around what that really looks like and means. So thank you, Naomi. Puji, moving on to you. So, I mean, you bring such a rich experience. Puji has worked with so many different organizations and at so many different levels of the system. And I know that you are very passionate about advocacy. So I'd love to hear your stories around how civil society works at that level of advocacy.
Thank you, Kate. Colleagues, I will not present you with compelling stories. We have enough already. Instead, what I'll do is I'll deal with the title of the session itself, Elevating Local Voices in the context of converting crisis into resilience. I guess the title connotes something. Elevating connotes that something is low that needs to be upgraded. That's elevating. So, one question. What is it that needs to be elevated? Right? Number two, local. This is a construct that put us in the, there is a local, there is something that is not local, and what is the relationship, right? And the third one is the notion, how do we capitalize on the crisis so that increase our resilience? So within that context, I'll just give a little commentary and accounting for my own experience. Now, Indonesia, my country, as you're probably aware, have been battered by disasters, by conflict over years. And surely local NGOs are seasoned in dealing with those things. And also dealing with guests from outside who are trying to help. And that relationship built over years. The same conversation happening at the global level, what's so-called grand bargain, humanitarian reform, localization, all of this reverberation of that conversation at the ground level, where local voices like what you just heard now may have not found its way, that it become consequence that make decision like what Naomi was saying. To cut a long story short, we were in Indonesia struck by many disasters. One of the latest was Sulawesi, earthquake. Government make a sudden decision, no to international actors, right? Suddenly the word localization comes to life. By circumstances, not by design. When the local actors like us will have to step in because the international were not allowed to operate. So in one hand, you see international communities get disoriented and scrambling around, and we, with whatever constraint and limitation, we have to step in. That brings huge dynamics. And amidst that, as we reorganize ourselves, Pujiono Center, my organization, got connected with a colleague from international and regional organization, tried to take a snapshot of that situation, see what we can learn. So we came out with a short research and capturing the first 100 days of that unique situation as a starting point of conversation. And we'll follow through after that. Keep looking at localization from the perspective of alliance of NGOs, of the northern NGOs, see how they operate. Looking at it from one individual NGOs, how do they operate? And be privileged to know how these things are moving. So localization is a joint passion topic, but you and us understand it very differently. On their side, localization is simply what used to be global or regional being translated to local. That's what the word localization means. But we see it differently. We think localization is the emergence of local leadership and capabilities, raising, not only filling the gaps, but to take the center stage. You heard from the ladies, my colleagues here. Where is that space? You cannot wait until they give you. You have to read and take it. So with that regard, out of that research, the finding of the research confirmed the preoccupation that all of us share. Indonesian NGOs are concerned with coordination or the gaps in it. Funding shortage, always, everywhere is the same thing. Accountability and capacities. The same agenda, but with different shapes, right? So from the perspective of Indonesia, and I recall, we were preparing ourselves for the APMC-DRR in Brisbane in early 2019. Only weeks later, the pandemic hits, right? So what we did in Indonesia, we used the same meeting, but now we're talking about differently. We talk about how are we going to deal with this pandemic. So we requested our international partners, since we still have a little bit of money, can we divert the money a little bit? Not to continue with the research as such, but let's convert to action research. So what we did, we brought our Indonesian colleagues into a network for response to pandemic. Around 400, 450 NGOs get together, meet every week, and get the government into account of their action, their plan, their program, and communicate it with us, right? Out of that one, when pandemic slowed down and the energy went down, we raised it up again, and now we established Indonesian Development and Humanitarian Alliance, knowing that humanitarian alone will not answer the problem. As far as we're concerned, there is no divide between humanitarian and development. So we better bring them together. So 7 major and largest networks of Indonesia get together into this alliance. Around 700 up to 800 NGOs are in the network. And myself, I was designated to be a Sherpa in the Grand Bargain, sitting with the head of the UN, the donors and others, and speaking for the Global South. So in brief, Kate, one, in terms of elevating, I illustrated to you how the local concern get elevated to the higher level. And then local, I illustrated to you how the local interact with their counterparts from outside. And voices clearly is the articulation of the concern that we have here. And the fourth one, the conversion of the crisis into opportunities to build the local voices to reckon with and to work with. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Puji. I always love listening to you talk about how advocacy unfolds and the idea of voices needing to find their way into influence decision-making. I really love, so thank you so much. What I would like you all to do now is to find your polls. I was told that this might be quite a challenge, but you all look like a really smart bunch. So I reckon we're going to be fine with this. If you go into the Spotlight 7 on your conference app, and you click on the poll, hopefully the question that will come up is, are civil society organisations given space to shape disaster preparedness and risk reduction? Now, the poll's going to be open for the next 20 or so minutes while we have a discussion, so please, I can see people already jumping in to provide their responses to that, and we'll come back and reflect on that towards the end. Whilst you're pulling up the poll and putting in your responses, I would love to just see if there are any particular questions here in the room. I'd love to hear for some people. There's a microphone just here. And I think in particular it's a lovely way to show your support for the wonderful panelists is to be able to follow up with some questions and some ideas. So I can see a hand up over there. Oh, Sarah, do you want to go first? And then maybe the lady behind you. And it might be good if you're both happy to do the questions. We'll take both your questions together, and then we can pose them to panelists and hopefully take a couple more. Do you want to do yours as well, Jules, at the same time? Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Is it working? Okay.
Yep.
I'm Mary Farrow. I live in Melbourne, and I run a childcare center in a high-risk area. And we have so much to learn from you in your experience from women taking care of children and others in these environments, because in this country and in other countries, we're so reliant on this. When disaster happens, it's the first thing to go. Yeah. Communications and power. So child care centers and care centers are pop-up vulnerable places that are getting really no attention because everybody's preparing their disaster response based on this. So how did you find, I know you talked about, some of you have talked about losing the connection to the internet and all that kind of stuff. There must be parts of that strengthen your response to say, okay, we don't have this and that's not going to stop us. And I'd like us to benefit from that, because we're in real trouble unless we can learn from your experience.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary. Sarah, maybe we'll take all three.
Hi, Sarah Burrows from the Australian Council for International Development. We've heard across this conference from all our formal processes, systems and structures how absolutely essential civil society and the diverse voice of local communities are. And yet we actually hear from the diverse voices of local communities. We hear again and again, and I could not possibly have put it more clear than Naomi, that not at the table. There are no resources. There is no engagement. What it seems to me that we need is so much more than conversation. And the governments, UN, INGOs and others need to cede power, decision-making, and more importantly, resources to local communities. So my question is, and I have no doubt you are definitely up for this conversation, but how do we increase the number of these uncomfortable and difficult conversations around power, around decision-making, around resources, and how do we then lead that to action?
Thank you. Jules.
Thank you. My name's Jules Frost, and I'm the Humanitarian Civil Society Advisor into the Australian Civil Military Centre. And I work there to help equip Australia whole of government respond effectively overseas. So as you all were speaking about the disasters you've experienced and the importance of community and elevating the local voice, what advice could you give for the engagement with military actors or police actors when they are coming to support? Where and how can they engage effectively and draw upon the indigenous knowledge in supporting a response to such types of disasters? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Janice Ian Manutak from Oxfam. My question is, and we're in a ministerial conference, and maybe this won't be answered by you, but from your governments. There's really some difficulty when it comes to logistics. When you want to transfer money to local NGOs, for example, from outside of the country, you want to provide aid. In our experience, we have some partners who can't receive because they don't have any, like there should be some government permitting process and all those things. And that makes it really, really difficult to do that. And I wonder from your experience, if you have the big alliances or networks of local NGOs, how do you advocate to your governments to make this process simpler so that we can have that grand bargain direct funding to local CSOs? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got a couple more questions and then we will have to pause there so we have time to answer them, but I'm jotting them down, so I will reframe them for the panel.
Sure.
Yep.
Yes, respected panels and our participant. This is Ramesh from India. Basically, in the local terminology, there is some indigenous community and some Dalits. So in the inclusive approach, why the Dalits and the rural poor are still excluded?
Sure.
How we can localize? Because in the terms of the local communities, still there are some elite, and they are creating obstacles to the community who are always lagging behind. So the decision-making process, how the Dalits, how the deprived section and excluded community can be mainstream for the decision-making. Yeah. So that's my question.
Thank you. And the last question, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Pagi Pak Puji. I would like to ask you, most of us work in NGOs in a project base, 3 to 4 years, and then afterwards program is finished. And or during the time of those NGOs working, they do it as a pilot project on in several areas instead of covering the whole country. So in your perspective, especially Pak Puji, I would like to find out, in your opinion, how did the CSOs or local actors work on that situation from the lens of localization? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's so delightful to have so many questions come out. Thank you so much. And I guess the good news is that we'll all be around during the lunch break coming up. So if we can't get to all of them, please follow up with the panelists. But I'd love to start with the question maybe with you, Kiasi, looking particularly at that idea around mobile communication. And if we can all, as panelists, keep our responses to about 2 minutes so we can try and get through as many questions as possible.
Yeah, well, when the cable, the underseawater cable, when the volcanic erupted, obviously it got disconnected and there was no form of communication. I can say there was a lot of family time, so
It's a blessing.
which was good. we were actually really happy, which meant that the youths and teenagers and families were talking to each other rather than having youths look at their phone. However, the communication, because the island is a small place, there was still, the vehicles and stuff. So if you needed to, go and check out your family, or it was, and you can drive out in your vehicle. So that's how, or you can just walk over, do a bit of exercise. But, it wasn't that everybody kind of suffered because of the lack of communication. It was actually quite good. Like I said before, a lot of family time, catch up, and even though there was a lot of loud concerns from the public about the delays, and they were asking questions, why is it taking so long, why is it taking forever to get this cable connected. However, the local radio managed to get some equipment over, and there was communication through the local radio with the people getting messages out, government getting messages out, and even families getting messages out to the outer islands. So I think for our office, we were lucky. Our internet was still running. I don't know how, why, but we were currently operating the CSO hub at the time. So I think it was just a blessing, and everyone was asking for if they can come in and use our office, and we said, no, we're just using it for humanitarian work. However, it took like 2 or 3 weeks, to get things back to normal. And then when things got back to normal, and then, what we saw was an advantage, just like everyone, children, or not children, but youths, everybody was back to their phones. But there was a positivity there with the break in the communication. However, when it was up and running, everybody was happy because they can communicate and talk to their families, which was a relief because a lot of families were very, very concerned when that volcano erupted. Yeah. So I hope I kind of answered your question.
I like the fact the internet services understood the CSO's centrality to the response. That's very good news. On the question, I think, around how comfortable we are to have difficult conversations around power, I would love both Siale and Naomi to respond to that question. And again, just 2 minutes, very brief, if you may. Although it's a massive question, so recognizing that's a difficult one to, it might require follow-up.
Thank you. I think that are critical questions, but it's what we find is that it's when it comes to humanitarian, everyone has the empathy to talk about a lot of difficult situations or difficult conversation can happen. But in our Pacific, we can talk about almost anything except money. Because we feel that it's not in our culture to talk about it. We feel we are uncomfortable with that. And so I think this is where the commitment that needs to come with resources, allow and give spaces to people and even present to them how much you're bringing. Yeah? Because we need to start building faith and trust in relationship and existing structures that are already there. Yeah? For example, in the Tonga response, while we were working with Kirsty to do the response, our government were busy with the diplomacy of making sure that the helicopters from Australia are coming and New Zealand are coming and all the conversation is happening at that level. And so while they're doing that, people are dying. So how do we make sure that the anticipatory actions and resources are placed with our local actors, so that the questions from Oxfam that you don't have to worry about dealing with the limitations that government are responding in terms of trying to control income, money and all that, because you already placed your money in where it should be to respond. Yeah? The other last point in that, Kate, is the alternative system. Yeah? If government system does not work, like in the communication blackout, our traditional and our local system kicked in. The churches, the community-based, yeah? And so this is also need to be recognized. Unfortunately, in the way that our humanitarian is like it's too much based on politics and too much based on contractual arrangement. Not based on empathy, not based on passions, and not based on relationship and trust, which a lot of our civil society, that's our power. Yeah? Build on that and how you connect people to their relationship, and they will put in any resources that they have. We have seen it work in the past, it can still work now. Thank you.
Thanks, Siale. Naomi, maybe your response to that question as well around difficult conversations, but also if you can pick up, I think it was Ramesh who asked about how you actually create an inclusive approach as well. So what are some of the practical steps? So maybe those 2 pieces, difficult conversations and the practical steps conversation.
All right, thank you. I'd like to raise 2 points here. I think when it comes to humanitarian, we know that there are good example and good work has been done in our countries, especially in our communities. But perhaps from the perspective of lens of disability, we would like to see that we are in the center of the work that our NGOs, the government, partners, that we can give the space for us to share what actually our needs and what actually that benefits us. So perhaps from my experience, I take a step that I've been working with these 6 partners in the country in terms of disaster already. Perhaps it's challenging for me as a person with disability, and then it's a only position role that I have to mobilize the disability inclusion throughout the work of the AHP. But I have to give my effort a ways that I try to see how I can reach and how I can give in the capacity, especially to build the capacity of the partners in terms of training them on disability inclusion, and also give them resources which we have, like a Washington group of questions, which is, it helped them to capture especially the data of persons with disability, because this is the challenge for Solomon Island. In our country, we don't have accurate data, which is actually to meet the needs of the persons with disability. We have Ministry of Health, which is CBRO, the community-based rehabilitation, which is the disability focal point for the government. Perhaps they have the data, but it needs to be reviewed, and it needs to be tried to get another survey to help that to capture all the data of the persons with disabilities in our community. So that practical ways, I have to look in a way that I get to approach to all the partners in our communities.
And a kind of survey that involves you in doing it.
Yes.
Thank you, Naomi. So Puji, we might finish up with you. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left, but I think it's really, But I think it's really important that we touch on this point about the engagement with military actors and the advocacy to government. And so I don't know if you've got some reflections on those two particular points that were raised.
Yeah. Maybe it's very quickly, Sarah. This huge conference, the civil society has 1 hour stakeholders meeting, right? My vision would be 2 years from now, the meeting is going to happen somewhere else. I think we need to envision a parallel track in which CSOs will have opportunity to sit along the way and undertake this difficult conversation and find a way to inform the mainstream of the conference. Instead of, you know, we try to find a little opening here and there, whisper to the one who holds the pen, leave it. That was the game of 1920s. We have to go somewhere else, right? Parallel track, and whoever hosting the next meeting, remember this, we're gonna ask it from you. Let's make a parallel track and make it work, right? But Sarah, that will require us, our own kind, CSO, also to pull ourselves together. Yesterday we had a conversation, very compassionate conversation, where the Asia CSO and Pacific CSOs sit, not for the first time, for nth time now, but now they open up the opportunity. Let's start be friends. Let's talk to one another. Let's build the momentum. So creating space is one, but creating momentum among ourselves is another. That, I think, will allow us to talk about these difficult things in a more, you can cry still, but we need to elevate that cry and compassion into something that really changes, right? I think that's how it complements itself. Number 2, on the military. Let me start with this. The CSO's relationship with the military are not always buttery, smooth, and warm. We have gone through a period, an episode where we have been subjected to terrible military regime and junta. So love and hate relationship with the military is deep-seated in many of us. The involvement of the military in disaster management humanitarian is something that we watch very cautiously. Because in the area of humanitarian, you would relax a bit some of your caution. And the military approach could encroach so far into human rights exactly on people that we seek to protect. Yeah. That being said, we don't hate the military, we love them. Okay? But that love will need to be reciprocated. I think military exercise and involvement by far is confidence building in nature. It's not a military operation, it's confidence building between Australia and Indonesia in this case. So my message to you, when you do that exercise, bring your civil society along. Amen. Bring your Australian ACFID colleague to Indonesia. Let us talk, drink, eat together, maybe sleep together, but later. But let them engage, let them talk, let them talk to your officers. We don't understand your language, you don't understand our subculture. Maybe that will open up, right? So military operation, military exercise must involve civil society if you would like to leverage this good relationship to become something useful. Don't leave us out and then say, how come you don't help us? Well, you don't talk to us, all right? It's cheap to bring civil society, so don't worry. Sometimes we pay ourselves.
Thank you so much, Puji. This is advocacy in action. I'm sure you can all just imagine what a powerhouse all of these panelists are when they get in a room with a government stakeholder or a military stakeholder and they're able to speak their minds. So giving civil society space to be able to have these difficult conversations is probably one of the most important things we can do. On that, I would love to just pop back to the poll, if we're able to pull it up and just look at the results of the poll. I don't know if that's feasible. Thank you very much. So, did it not reload from before? Okay, I think when I looked at it before, sorry, we'll have to pop back. So I think when the poll results went in before, just before it went down, rarely was like off the chart, was my memory of the poll when it came up before. So I think it's just reloaded. So I think that that's a really important place to end in terms of the fact that civil society are rarely engaged enough. Unless we give them the space for the conversations like this that we have heard today, then we will not see DRR being effective. I want you to join me in thanking our panelists so much for being with us today. Well done. Awesome. So many questions. Well done.